Okay, ready to pick up where we left off with the story Wrong Side Up. And I'll back up just a little bit so that we remember exactly where it was that we left off, as we had to leave off in a bit of haste. They've just been told at the Chicago stockyards that they cannot take the pigs with them on their journey to Montana. And this is where we pick up their response to that. Bud said, "I know what we'll do, for we'll take a chance." "What do you mean by taking a chance?" I said. He replied, "Get rid of the pigs, or else stay here until we do, for you can't bluff that fellow. But we'll let the pigs decide this for themselves, for we'll open the crate, and if they jump out of the car, they're gone. But if they crawl under the freight, we'll sneak them through. That's fair, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, "but what if we get caught? Then we'll have to unload the whole car to get those pigs out from under all that junk." One end of the car was loaded with horses and cows, while the other end was packed with machinery and equipment. A wagon box had been put in upside down, and a few bales of straw had been shoved into the open end. As the pigs were in a crate, they were in plain view in the center of the car. The final day of reading the test came, and as the inspector was to come at 9 o'clock a.m., the little pigs were fed early, and a few bales of straw were pulled out of the wagon box. "Now here goes," said Bud, while with an axe he broke out a few boards of the crate. The little pigs, which had just been weaned, soon found the open end of the wagon box. Hastily then a few bales of straw were shoved into the end of the box, and our little pigs were trapped. Just at that moment the inspector walked in and said, "Well, boys, you'll have to sell the cows, for they have TB, but the horses are all right. I see you've rid yourselves of the pigs, so if you get rid of the cows by noon, I'll clear you out at 1 o'clock. Just then one of the little pigs let out a little squeak, and Bud grabbed a couple of water buckets and rattled them until the inspector's mind again became normal, for he had had a questioning look on his face. After looking around the car once more, he jumped out to the ground. He was no more than out when the pigs set up an awful squeal. "Boy, oh boy," I said, "that was a close shave." The sweat was on our foreheads, and Bud said, "Let's sell those cows in a hurry and get out of here." This was done, and so at last, without cows for milk, but with 5 little pigs, which were needed so badly, the okay was given, and the locomotive backed into the car and took us to the yards of the C, B, and Q. There we were put into a train being made up for St. Paul and Minneapolis. In relating this, I am not excusing our actions and conduct, but let the reader decide if this was a good start on so huge an undertaking. We both had God-fearing Christian parents, and we had been taught what was right and wrong. Now, for the sake of a few pigs, we lied. "I don't think that was quite right," I said on the next evening while waiting in the Argo yards. "Why not?" "Well, we just about lied about those pigs." "We did not," said Bud. "The inspector said if you got rid of the pigs," and we did not answer him. "Or I see you got rid of the pigs," and we did not answer him. "After all, the pigs were out of the crate, weren't they?" "Yes, but it just doesn't seem right to me." "Well, they got our cows, didn't they? And after all, they lied about those cows because the vet back home found them okay. And just because they're afraid of their old hoof and mouth disease is no reason why we should lose everything, is it?" "Well, let's hope it turns out okay," I said. "But you know what you said the other day, that every action has a reaction. Whatever you meant, maybe that applies to this too." "Ah, shut up about those lousy pigs. You'll be glad next winter that we snuck them through," said Bud. "Yes," I said, "but they got our cows. So now what are we going to feed those pigs over there on the prairie?" He did not answer a word. 3 days had already been spent in our small home, and we could still see the smoke of Chicago. Montana was 1,400 miles away. The next morning, we were awakened from our bales of straw, which served as our beds, to a steady click, clack, click, clack. At last we were rolling, and the Illinois countryside was unfolding itself before our eyes as we partly opened one door. After feeding the horses and pigs that had again come out from their new home, we satisfied ourselves with some bread and sausage. We then sat in the doorway watching the scenery pass by. Every time a siding stop was called, one of us would get out of sight as the brakeman was very near us, since our car was the 10th from the caboose. We knew very well that only one man was allowed to each immigrant car. Thus, until the evening of that first day of the trip, the hours were spent looking from the open doorway until dusk made us more bold, and we both sat very near the door. As we were busily talking, we did not notice footsteps overhead, but suddenly we were gazing into the face of the rear brakeman who, on going to the front, had heard voices and was now lying on his stomach with his toes hooked onto the runway of the car. Thus, from his upside-down position, was looking into the car. He gazed for a moment and then disappeared. "What now?" I said. "Oh, if he stops the train to investigate, I'll jump off," said Bud, "and hook a ride on a car farther up the train and see you in the morning." While we were thus speaking and arguing who was to go, the train suddenly began to jerk as the brakes were applied. Slowly came to a stop. It had by now become quite dark, and my friend quietly jumped from the opposite door from where he was to run forward and grab the train as it went on. A lantern came bobbing from the rear, and I, who by now had closed the other door, saw a brakeman coming in the car. "Say, friend, what's going on here?" he says. "Where's the other guy I saw you with?" "He jumped out when the train stopped," I said. "Oh, yes?" "Well, I'll have to have a look around." Whereupon he started to swing his lantern around and light up the dark corners of the boxcar. Suddenly, thinking that the other man might be in front of the horses that had their heads to the front end of the boxcar, he moved toward them. As soon as he tried that, a mare named Queen would soon have hoisted him to the ceiling had he come any closer. However, a shout from me brought him up just in time as Queen's hooves came whistling through the air. He then made me go in front of the horses with a lantern so that he could see clearly that no one was hiding there. "Who was that guy, and what did he want in here?" "Oh, he wanted to go west." "Do you have any money with you?" asked the brakie. "Some," I said. "Well, let me tell you that picking up bums and giving them a lift may cost you your life someday. Those bums will slit your throat for less than half of what you've got. And then where would you be? And furthermore, you're not riding in this boxcar anymore on our run, but lock up and come back to the caboose where you belong." So the door was locked from the outside, so no one could get in even though he tried. I had the key and was marched back to the caboose with the brakie. On arriving at the shanty on wheels, another sermon was preached by the conductor, who was sitting at his desk looking over the train's manifest. Again, I was told some horrible stories by the conductor of how bums had killed trainsmen and others for just a little money. In the meantime, the brakeman had signaled the engineer, and the train was again moving northward along the Mississippi, heading for St. Paul. I was wondering, while the conductor was talking, of how my pal was faring up ahead, and hoped on the return of the brakeman to hear some more news of the so-called bum. The train began to buck and jerk as more speed was gained, and I feared that Bud would be slung from his precarious hold on the handrails of some box or tank car. Finally, the brakie returned, and after growling a few words to the conductor, climbed up to his perch in the cupola. The conductor motioned to a bunk along the wall and advised me to get some sleep. I lay down, but sleep was far from me, and morning could not come too soon so that I might go to the car and open it in order to give my buddy a chance to crawl back in. Terrible thoughts raced through my brain as I lay there, thinking that for the price of a railroad fare, a life might be lost. And how would I ever explain this matter to his father in case he became lost or hurt? Why had we been so foolish to try to steal from the railway company the price of a fare and thus call down on ourselves all this misery? And there were still over 1,000 miles to go. All sorts of things came to my mind of what could be happening to him. Even in this July weather, it was no joke riding in the open breeze. Finally, I thought, oh, he'll be all right, and I'll see him in the morning. And I fell asleep. Such is the optimism of youth. As I awoke, sunlight was streaming into the little windows of the caboose, and after a few moments I realized where I was. Jumping from the bunk, I rushed up to the conductor and said, "I must hurry to my car to feed the horses. Stop the train, please." "Sit down, buddy, sit down. I'm stopping no train for a reason like that. At Division Point, you'll have plenty of time to feed your horses. We'll be there in about 70 minutes. 70 minutes of torture and agony these proved to be for me. My mind again began to conjure up all sorts of calamities. But even 70 miles come to an end, and the train pulled into the yard some miles from St. Paul. I quickly ran to the car and unlocked the door. The other door had not been locked, but with the jerking of the car had opened about an inch. Ah, I thought, Bud is in the car. So cautiously I whistled, then talked, then shouted, but no one answered. Only the horses whinnied. I came to the realization that my partner had not been able to get back in the car. Oh, what now? Here were open prairie on one side and the Mississippi on the other, but where was my partner? The horses were fed, and then I made a sandwich of some bread and cheese from the war chest, as we called it. But the food was as ashes in my mouth. Even the little pigs looked at me with gloomy eyes and seemed to have lost interest in the trip. After a short stop, the train moved on, and about 6 hours later it pulled into the St. Paul yards. It was a maze of tracks and trains, and where in all this jumble would Bud find the car, even if he got this far? That was the problem of the moment, so it seemed. The train was put on a siding, and a crew of men went to work checking the journal boxes and wheels while others looked after the air brakes. I asked one of these men where the office was, as I knew that from here another railroad would take the car the balance of the trip to Montana. I was told to go about 1/2 mile up the tracks, and with my papers in my pocket, I started off to have the transfer made. With lagging steps, I drew near to the office, but I noticed a man limping badly, looking at all the cars as he walked down one track and then the other. As we came closer, the limping one raised his arm and waved, and sure enough, here was my lost pal. In those first moments, the limp was forgotten, and so was all the horrible nightmare of the night spent in the caboose. It seemed as though we had been separated for a week instead of one night and one day. As evening was falling, we quickly had the transfer made and went slowly back to the car, all thought of buying a ticket quite forgotten. On getting back in the car, I said, "Now tell me how you got here and how you come here limping. Are you sore-footed of walking so far?" "Let me lie down," he said, "and take a look at my leg. There's a hole below my knee. See if you can see anything there." So a lantern was lit and an examination made. "Why, it's all swollen and blue," I said. "How on earth did you do that?" "Well, I'll tell you. When I jumped out of the car that night, I ran up ahead about 10 cars while the train was stopped. After the train started, I grabbed a handrail and was going to climb to the top, but I saw a lantern light come bobbing forward, so I just clung to the side. That brakeman walked all the way to the engine, and not finding me, he starts back, swinging his lantern below the roof, first on one side of the train and then on the other. On coming to me, he swung his lantern right over my head, and I thought that he missed me. But he saw my white fingers clinging to the ladder on the side of the boxcar. The train was rolling along at a pretty good clip by now, and I was wondering what he would do. He said, "Get off!" But I didn't feel like jumping into the dark, so I didn't say anything, but hung on. He then said, "Jump, or I'll step on your fingers," and started down toward me. Not waiting any longer, I heaved out and jumped. I landed on one of those cattle guards that they have near the railroad crossings and must have jabbed a piece of wood into my leg. I rolled into the ditch and laid there for a bit and watched the lights of the caboose disappear into the night. "Did you stay there all night?" "No, I lay there for a few minutes and thought I'd better find some place to sleep the rest of the night. My leg did not pain me then, so I had no difficulty walking up the road and finding an old straw stack. I crawled into the straw for the night, but did not sleep much. So as soon as it was dawn, I looked for a house. There was a farmhouse not far from the tracks, and as my leg was paining me badly, I hobbled down there. The dogs began barking, and the farmer who was just out of bed came out to see. I guess that I did not look like a bum to him, so he said, "What's the matter, stranger?" I tried to tell him, but he dismissed this in a hurry after he heard that I'd hurt my leg. Then he said, "Go into the house. My wife will get you some breakfast." They fed me well and told me that it was 6 miles to the next depot where I could catch a train for St. Paul. After breakfast, I went out to the pump and bathed my leg in a tub of cold water. That helped some, and after thanking my good friends who would accept no pay for the breakfast, I started down the railroad to the next little town. Here I waited until the local train came in, and paying my fare to St. Paul, I soon caught up with you. I passed you sometime around noon and knew you would arrive this evening. So I hung around the yards looking at every train that came in, but I'm done talking. Go ahead and do something about my leg. And we'll keep it there until tomorrow. Bye-bye.